Victor Mitchell said it the way he said everything in public, barely above a murmur, lips barely moving, one hand resting on the back of her chair like he
Mrs.
owned the
Mitchell,
chair,
do you
the
enjoy these
table,
events or
the
do you
room.
simply survive them?
Smile before people start asking
Serena
questions.
loves this kind of thing.
Serena
She's very good with
smiled.
people.
She had
Aren't you?
become very good at that. At converting pain into expression inside a fraction of a second, the way a translator converts language. Instantly, without visible effort, the original meaning gone before anyone could hear what it used to be. Under the table, his fingers were still wrapped around her wrist. Not hard enough to be dramatic. Hard enough to be a reminder. The Jeongseon Foundation Gala occupied the second floor of a Gangnam-gu arts building that had once been a textile archive. You could still see the original ceiling beams if you looked up, dark wood crossing white plaster above the chandeliers someone had hung there to make the space forget what it used to be. The tables were dressed in ivory linen. Orchids floated in low glass bowls. Near the far wall, a string quartet was playing something European and unhurried. Serena had not looked at the orchids. She had been watching the table across from theirs since they sat down. Kang Ji-hoon had not spoken to anyone at his table in 12 minutes. She had been counting, not consciously, the way you count streetlights through a car window, just needing something regular to hold onto. He was watching her. Not the way men watched her at these events, the quick survey, then deliberate return to more interesting subjects. He was watching her arm, her wrist, the place where Victor's hand had been and still was. He was not looking away. Serena moved the wine glass. Adjustment. Reflex. She had learned to catch things before they fell, to turn the motion into something intentional. A woman shifting her water glass rather than a woman whose hand had gone unsteady. The wine settled. Victor released her wrist. She kept the smile. When she finally let herself meet Ji-hoon's gaze, his face had not changed. No expression of sympathy, no performance of concern, nothing she would have to manage or deflect. He simply looked at her. The way a person looks at something they have already decided to understand. She looked away first. Ji-hoon. Victor's voice had shifted, warmer now, louder, the version he used for men he needed things from. I didn't realize you'd be seated this close. We should have arranged a dinner. Should, Ji-hoon said. He stood unhurried and approached their table, but when he extended his hand in greeting, his eyes moved to Serena first. Not to Victor. Mrs. Mitchell, do you enjoy these events or do you simply survive them? It was such a strange question that for a moment she genuinely didn't know what to do with it. No one had asked her something like that, one with no obvious correct answer, one that assumed she might have an honest opinion, in longer than she could locate. Loves this kind of thing, Victor said. His hand found the back of her chair again. She's very good with people, aren't you? It wasn't a question. Ji-hoon watched the exchange. Then he smiled, the kind of smile that doesn't agree with what it's responding to. He returned to his table. 20 minutes later, when the foundation director began her remarks and the room's attention turned forward, Serena felt something land near her right hand. She looked down without moving her head. A white business card, face down. She did not touch it. Victor's hand came off the back of her chair and reached across her, smooth, casual, a husband leaning past his wife, and lifted the card before she could reach it. He pocketed it without looking at it. Then he put his hand on her shoulder and leaned close, his mouth near her ear. We'll talk about this later, he said. The foundation director was still speaking. The string quartet had paused. No one at the surrounding tables heard anything. Serena watched the orchids floating in their glass bowl. She thought, I have to get through the rest of the dinner first. Victor waited until the car. He didn't speak during the ride home. Not in the elevator, not in the hallway. He spoke in the kitchen. He had always chosen the kitchen, bright lighting, nowhere comfortable to sit, countertops clean and bare, nothing for her eyes to rest on. What did he say to you? Said hello, Serena said. He asked if I enjoyed the events. You answered. Before I sat down. I don't know what you mean. He looked at her for a long time. That was always the worst part, not the words, not the hands, but the looking. The way he studied her, the way a contractor studies a wall for damage, patient and certain, already convinced the crack was there, just finding where. You smiled at him, when he walked up, before he finished the sentence. I smile at everyone. Like that. She said nothing. She had learned that arguing about what her face had done was a hole you could not climb out of. He stepped forward. He took her wrist, same hand, same pressure, same fingers finding the same geography because he always remembered exactly where he'd been before. We have been invited to the Kang Group's foundation dinner next month. You're going to be charming and appropriate and completely uninteresting to him. Do you understand me? Yes, she said. He let go. He took a bottle of water from the refrigerator. and went to the living room and turned on the television. That was the end of it. Serena stayed in the kitchen. She looked at her wrist. The marks were already surfacing, not dramatic, not visible unless you were looking, and she pulled her sleeve down and started washing glasses that didn't need washing, because she needed her hands occupied with something ordinary. She stood at the kitchen window after the television went quiet. The 24-hour convenience store on the corner threw its white light into the dark. A delivery worker leaned against his bike outside, eating from a plastic container, in no particular hurry, belonging entirely to himself. She watched him until she didn't have to anymore. Then she turned off the kitchen light and went to bed. What would you do if someone noticed your pain before you said a word? 3 days later, Victor came home with persimmons. 5 of them, from the Gyeonggi market, the good variety, the ones he knew she preferred. He kissed the side of her head and asked what she wanted for dinner, and she said doenjang jjiggy because they had everything for it. And he sat at the counter while she cooked and asked about her day and actually listened to her answers. And at one point she said something that made him laugh. Genuinely. The full laugh. The one she remembered from before, and he reached across the counter and put his hand over hers. She held still while he touched her hand. His phone buzzed. He read it. Read it again. Kang Group wants a meeting, he said. She arranged her face before he looked up. Oh, she said, they've requested you present. Cultural liaison, they're calling it. He set the phone face down on the counter. This is a business meeting. You're going to sit there, you're going to answer what's asked, and you're going to make it completely clear that you are my wife. Of course. You tell him anything about us. Victor, I spoke 3 sentences to the man. He looked at the persimmons on the counter. Peel these before you cook. The skin goes bitter this time of year. Then he went into his office and closed the door, and she stood at the counter with the small knife, pulling the skin from each persimmon in careful strips, and she thought, something is already moving that I cannot see, and that is more frightening than anything I can name. The Kang Group's Seoul office occupied the upper floors of an older building in Yeonggu, stone-fronted, dark-framed windows, a lobby with original terrazzo flooring that clicked under her heels differently than marble lobbies did. A small cafe just inside the entrance. Handwritten menu on a chalkboard. The smell of roasted barley tea drifting toward the elevator bank. Victor walked 2 steps ahead of her. He always walked 2 steps ahead. Ji-hoon met them in a conference room on the 14th floor, long table of pale wood, windows facing east, cups of tea already poured and placed. He greeted Victor first. Appropriate. Then he turned to Serena and said, Mrs. Mitchell, I want your perspective on community trust building for the Foundation's Incheon expansion. Your husband mentioned you have experience in that sector. Victor had mentioned no such thing. His expression didn't flicker. She has excellent instincts there, he said smoothly. Ji-hoon pulled out a chair, not beside Victor, but across from him, adjacent to Ji-hoon's own seat, and waited. She had no choice but to sit there. Then he asked her a direct question about institutional credibility, and she answered it, because she actually knew the answer. She had worked in nonprofit coordination before the marriage. She had known things before the marriage. For 11 minutes she talked about what she understood, and Ji-hoon listened with the kind of attention that doesn't perform itself, already thinking ahead to her next sentence, holding what she said like it mattered, like it was worth holding. Victor interrupted her 3 times. Each interruption was smooth, framed as completion rather than correction, a husband finishing his wife's thought. Each time, Ji-hoon waited for it to end, then returned his question directly to Serena. Victor's hand found his tea. He rotated the cup once, set it back down. At the end, Ji-hoon said, Your wife has remarkable insight, Mitchell. Victor smiled. She reads people well, always has. Ji-hoon looked at him. I was referring to her professional knowledge, he said. But yes, that too. In the elevator going down, Victor stood 1 step behind her and to the right. She watched the floor numbers descend. She thought, whatever this is, it's moving faster now. And the thing moving it is not me. She ran into Aisha 3 weeks later on a narrow street in Yeoljiro, the kind of block where shop fronts are crowded together and the hangars overflow the doorways and the owners know your face after 2 visits. Aisha had a fabric sample in one hand and her hair pinned up. She was coming out as Serena was going in, and for a moment they just stood there, 2 years, maybe longer. The friendships had thinned after the marriage, the way they do when you can't explain the bruise, can't explain the constant canceling, can't explain why your husband answers your phone when you're standing right beside him. Serena, Aisha said. The smile Serena tried didn't fully take. Aisha didn't return it. She looked at her the way women who have known you a long time look at you, reading years of shared history into your current posture, the angle of your shoulders, whether your eyes are still where they used to be. Your name came up recently, Aisha said, carefully. Someone connected to Kang Ji-hoon reached out to a legal contact of mine. She mentioned your name in a way I didn't understand. Serena's body responded before her mind caught up a fractional stillness, the kind only someone watching for it would notice. Aisha was watching for it. I don't know why it would come up, Serena said. Really have to go. Aisha caught her hand, held it not tight, just present. The Serena I knew, she said quietly, wouldn't have gone still at the sound of her own name. Serena looked at their hands. I'm fine, she said. She withdrew. She walked down Yuljiro with her bag pressed to her side, and did not let herself think about Aisha's face until she was 3 blocks away. And then she thought about it. And she thought about the word flinched. Wouldn't have flinched at the sound of her own name. And the thing about that word was that Aisha was right. And Serena knew she was right. And the version of herself that wouldn't have flinched felt like someone she was no longer sure she was allowed to remember. She kept walking. The moment happened in the Hangang Cultural Foundation's working hall. Not a showroom. A real building. Long tables where volunteers sorted donation materials. Temporary exhibition walls half assembled. The smell of spray adhesive and old fabric. And the back office coffee that had been sitting on the burner too long. Serena had come as a patron. She was cataloging donated textiles when she reached across the table for a folded piece of embroidery, and her sleeve slid back with the reach. She felt the room shift before she looked up. Ji-hoon was at the adjacent table, studying an inventory sheet. He was not studying the inventory sheet. She pulled her sleeve down, turned back to the embroidery. The silk thread work on this is extraordinary, she said, to no one specifically. He said nothing. He moved to a different station, picked up a clipboard. 20 minutes later, the program director called a break. The hall thinned. Ji-hoon slid something across the long table, a small white envelope. His eyes stayed on the clipboard. Gwangjinggu, he said quietly, as though continuing a conversation already in progress. A building I maintain for visiting staff. Currently empty. Access code is written inside. No cameras on the residential floors. The access is permanent. She looked at the envelope. I'm not in trouble, she said. He looked at her arm. He did not look away. If he finds this. He won't, Ji-hoon said. Unless you tell him. That's not a promise you can make. I know. He set the clipboard down. Keep it anyway. Far door opened. Victor's driver stepped into the hall, scanned the room, found her. She covered the envelope with her palm and in one motion moved it into the inner lining of her coat, a hidden pocket she had sewn herself 6 months ago, for reasons she hadn't fully named at the time. The driver smiled. The car was ready whenever she stood. Thanked the director. Did not look at Ji-hoon. Walking out, she heard him say to the program director, completely unhurried, entirely conversational, remarkable work your volunteers do here. I'd like to discuss increasing the Kang Group's annual allocation. Han Si-hwa sent the note through the foundation's volunteer coordinator, a woman who asked no questions, passed it with a donated book like it was nothing, completely deniable. The note said, Thursday afternoon, 2nd floor corridor of the Arts Building. 15 minutes after the board session ends. Come alone if you can. If you can't, don't come. Victor let her attend the board session because the foundation connected to the Kang Group, and Victor wanted visibility there. He sent his driver. She arrived in the driver's car and sat through 90 minutes around a long table. Ji-hoon was there as a Kang Group representative. They did not speak directly. He asked 2 questions about grant allocations. She seconded a motion on community programming without looking at him. The motion carried. The room cleared by degrees after the session ended. Victor's driver went down to the lobby. Si-hwa appeared at the corridor door, gestured, disappeared. Serena followed. The corridor was utilitarian, painted concrete, fluorescent lighting, the sound of a photocopier running somewhere past the far door. Not a space designed for anything important. That was exactly why. Ji-hoon was standing at the corridor's end by a window that looked down into the building's interior courtyard. A small square of stone paving and a single ginkgo tree, winter bare, all branch and bone. He didn't turn around when she entered. I know what your husband has been doing with your signature, he said. She felt it go through her, not surprise. The thing past surprise. The confirmation of a fear you've carried so long you've almost convinced yourself it isn't real. Long have you known, she said. long enough to have documentation. She stayed a few feet behind him. She looked at the ginkgo tree. If you know, she said slowly, then the danger I'm in isn't just domestic anymore. He turned. It isn't. What do you want from this? He looked at her for a moment. Whatever answer he'd prepared, she could see him deciding against it. I want you to have an option, he said. That's all I'm offering, not a plan, not a rescue, an option. What's the difference? An option means you decide. A rescue means I do. She looked at him. She looked at the ginkgo tree. She thought about the key card and the coat lining. She thought about Aisha on the Yuljiro street, holding her hand, saying the Serena I knew wouldn't have flinched. She thought about her own hands flat on the kitchen table in the dark. And if I decide not to use it, she said, then you don't use it, he said. And I respect that. She didn't answer. He didn't push. Then the far corridor door opened, Victor's driver, face appearing in the gap, expression professionally neutral. Mrs. Mitchell, whenever you're ready. Ji-hoon turned back to the window. Kang Group appreciates the board's work today, he said to the corridor generally. The motion was well considered. She walked back to the door, to the driver, to the car. She sat in the back seat as they moved into Yongu traffic, and she put her hand inside her coat and felt the small shape of the key card envelope through the lining, and she did not reach for it. But she did not move her hand. Park Tae-jun had been trying to get Ji-hoon to sit down for this conversation for 11 days. Ji-hoon finally agreed to it at 7 in the evening, after the building had largely emptied, in his office with the city laid out behind the window at a volume that made everything happening inside the room feel very quiet by comparison. Tae-jun came in, closed the door, set a folder on the desk. He didn't sit until Ji-hoon gestured. Even then he sat the way men sit when they need the other person to understand this isn't casual. Mitchell's holding structure spans 7 entities across 3 jurisdictions, Tae-jun said. The structure itself passes inspection. What moves through it doesn't. He opened the folder, slid a single page across. Starting 18 months ago, multiple transfers were co-signed by a second party, used to validate the receiving entities as legitimate personal holdings. Ji-hoon looked at the signature line. He looked at it for a long time. Serena A. Mitchell. Her capital S, the way the M rose slightly higher than it should. She doesn't know, Ji-hoon said. She signed the documents. She doesn't know. Tae-jun closed the folder. He picked up the pen that was lying on Ji-hoon's desk and turned it over in his hands. He did that when he was choosing words carefully. Mitchell knows that she doesn't know. That's the architecture. If anything surfaces, her name is on every transfer. She faces exposure she can't afford to manage alone. He has calculated this. She cannot leave without risking everything, and she cannot stay without being used further. That is not an accident. That is the design. Ji-hoon turned toward the window. Below, the street was doing its ordinary evening things, a pajangmacha cart being pushed along the pavement, a man stopping every 50 meters or so for no visible reason, lights coming on in apartment buildings in that staggered way they do when people come home from different distances. Get me everything, Ji-hoon said. Every document with her signature, every entity her name touches. Tae-jun set the pen down. If we build a case, he knows immediately. He escalates. He stood. What is this woman to you? Ji-hoon didn't answer. Ji-hoon, Tae-jun waited. That's not a rhetorical question. Me the documents, Ji-hoon said. Please. Tae-jun left. Ji-hoon stayed at the window for a while, not looking at anything in particular, until the pajangmacha cart disappeared around a corner and the street settled back into its ordinary shape. In the days that followed, Serena found a message on her secondary phone. The one Victor didn't know she still maintained. The SIM tucked inside a hollowed-out paperback on the bottom shelf of the living room bookcase. The message was from Aisha, a screenshot, forwarded from her legal contact, a fragment of a corporate filing. Serena's name on a line she didn't recognize. A transfer she didn't remember authorizing. The signature looked like hers because it was hers, the particular slant of her S, the M that always rose too high. She recognized her own handwriting on a document she had never read. She sat on the bathroom floor with the shower running and read it 4 times. Then she turned off the shower, dried her hands, put the phone back in her coat, and returned to the kitchen where Victor was on a call behind his office door. She put a pot on the stove. She stood there while the water came slowly to temperature and thought about how many things pass through a marriage. How many documents. How many pens you take without reading what's above your name, because in the beginning there is no reason to read, not yet. The water boiled. She turned off the burner. She looked at the pot for a while. Then she put her hand inside her coat and held the key card envelope through the fabric. Just held it, and stood there in the kitchen that was his and not hers, in the apartment that was his and not hers, in the life she had believed could still be managed if she was careful enough, and she thought, I have been so careful. I have been so careful for so long, and none of it was ever going to be enough. Do you think Serena should leave, or is she too afraid? Victor came home from a dinner meeting in Mapo at 10 in the evening. She heard the quality of his entrance before he spoke, the way he set his briefcase rather than placed it, how long he stood in the hallway before moving. These were the things you learned to read. These small sounds that told you what the next hour would look like. She was in the kitchen making tea. She stayed at the counter. He came to the doorway. Ji-hoon's people photographed documents at my Mapo office this afternoon, he said. Documents that carry your name. She kept her hands on the kettle. I didn't know anything about that, she said. I know you didn't. He came into the kitchen. He sat at the counter. His voice was completely level, that register, not the raised one, always the one that meant the most. What you need to understand, Serena, is that your name is on those documents. If this becomes a legal matter, it becomes your legal matter. You don't have the resources to manage that alone. She poured water into the cup. So you stay, he said. You don't respond to him, you don't go near anyone connected to him. You perform this marriage the way you always have because the alternative costs you everything. Every document, every certification, every transfer you signed. He stood. He looked at her steadily. Tell me you understand. I understand, she said. He took her tea from the counter. He carried it to the living room. She heard the television come on. She stood where she was. She did not look at the window. She looked at her own hands on the edge of the kettle. She thought about what he'd said. You don't have the resources. She thought about the legal contact Aisha had mentioned. She thought about Ji-hoon at the window in his office saying, get me everything. She thought, he told me I can't survive this alone. He didn't say the documents were legitimate. Went to the bedroom. She took her coat from the closet. She sat on the edge of the bed with the keycard envelope in both hands, then her secondary phone inside the coat pocket, inside the paperback where Victor had never looked, buzzed once. She reached for it, a message from a number she didn't have saved. 3 words, come before dawn. She looked at the bedroom door. The television moved in waves beneath it. She looked at the window. The street below was ordinary and dark. She looked at the keycard. She put on her coat. She put on her shoes. She went to the front door and opened it so carefully that the latch made no sound at all when she pulled it closed. The building in Gwangjingu was a partial renovation. New elevators, old stairwells, fresh paint in the corridors, and original wood underneath. 7th floor. The unit was small. A single lamp had been left on. A kitchen, a window facing east, a view across a residential neighborhood that was entirely ordinary and felt, for that reason, like something she hadn't seen in a long time. She sat on the floor, not on the couch. On the floor with her back against the wall beneath the window, coat still on, and she sat there and breathed and took stock of what it felt like to be in a room where no one was measuring her. Victor's monitored phone rang. She looked at it on the floor in front of her. She let it ring. When it stopped, something shifted slightly inside her chest, not relief yet, not fully, but the first small degrees of something that could eventually become it. The phone started again. She put it face down and looked at the ceiling. She thought, I do not know what comes next. And underneath the fear of that, very small, tentative, not yet fully trustworthy, was the recognition that not knowing had stopped feeling entirely like danger. The buzzer sounded. She went to the panel. She heard Siwa's voice through the intercom, not Ji-hoon's, and she buzzed her up. Siwa came through the door the way she did, everything direct, no wasted motion. She was already holding her phone out as she crossed the room. Ji-hoon needs you to see this. On the screen, a corporate structure diagram. Kang Group Holdings, a subsidiary layer, foundation adjacent, not publicly filed. Serena read down the page, listed as a partial beneficiary. Serena A. Mitchell, the date at the top, 8 months ago. 4 months before the gala. 6 months before the corridor. 7.5 months before Ji-hoon had asked if she enjoyed these events or simply survived them. She read it twice. 3 times. She read it until the words stopped rearranging themselves into something she could dismiss. She handed the phone back to Siwa. Then she sat down on the floor, the same place she'd been sitting before the buzzer, back against the wall, coat still on. She sat there for a moment and said nothing. Siwa didn't say anything either. She sat on the floor too, which Serena had not expected, and the two of them sat there in the small apartment on the 7th floor of a building that smelled like new paint and old wood, with Victor's phone still face down somewhere on the floor across the room. "Did you know," Serena asked, "before tonight, that your name was in the structure?" "No," Siwa paused. "That Ji-hoon knew your name before the gala?" "Yes." Serena absorbed that. "Is he dangerous?" she said. "To me, specifically." Siwa looked at her. "I've worked with Ji-hoon for 6 years. He has never done anything I could call dangerous. He has done things I couldn't fully explain at the time." She looked down at the phone in her hand. "This is one of them." They stayed like that until the stairwell door in the hallway opened. She heard footsteps that stopped outside, and then a knock, not the buzzer, an actual knock, which meant he'd come up the stairs and was standing outside the door. Siwa stood. She opened the door and stepped aside. Ji-hoon came in. Coat still on. He looked different, not controlled, not composed the way he always was in those conference rooms and corridors and charity halls. The way a person looks when they've been holding something at a careful distance for a long time and the distance has just closed. He looked at Serena on the floor. He didn't tell her to stand up. He sat down across from her, back against the opposite wall, coat on, the same floor. Siwa moved quietly to the kitchen. Neither of them noticed her go. "Before the gala," Serena said. "Yes." "You knew my name before we met?" "Yes." She waited. He didn't move. She watched him decide how to begin, then set the beginning aside, then sit with the absence of words, which was somehow more honest than any version of the explanation would have been. She held Siwa's phone out to him, her name still on the screen, the corporate document, the date 8 months prior. She watched him look at it. She watched him look at her. "Long," she said. "Have you known my name?" And he opened his mouth, and the answer lived right there. The gala, the card, the corridor, the kitchen floor, the 8 quiet steps out of a door she was not going back through. All of it suspended, waiting for the word that still hadn't come. Can love heal someone emotionally destroyed for years?